We talked before about this metaphor of a building, and we can think about, for example, a house and all the rooms in the house and the fact that each room has a different purpose. The bathroom has a purpose, the kitchen has a purpose, and each room is laid out in a particular way. And when you enter a house, you know it's been designed for you to walk into a particular room first and then second. And those are the structural features of a house, the way the house is constructed. In a similar way, structure in literary texts is about how the writer deliberately manipulates the reader into thinking about characters or events or themes in a particular way, and how they achieve that through where things happen or other structural devices. And there's a lot to go through. I'm just going to go through about 8 things today. What I'm going to go through in this video is some structural features that apply to prose, drama and poetry. But in the next videos I'll look at the specific kind of things you should look at in terms of structure for prose, and then for drama, then for poetry. It's all in the ebook if you want it written down, see it in front of you, and the ebook does go into more detail as well. But I'm going to go through a few of the structural things you can look for when you're analysing a text. So one of the things you can look at is the length of sentences. Short sentences often create a sense of heightened energy or emphasize important moments, and they're often long sentences for description. You can look at how writers use punctuation for impact. For example, a colon, which is like a trumpet heralding something important in the next clause. It's quite interesting to think about the fact that length of sentences and punctuation are not in themselves really complex ideas or sort of things to think about. I mean, we can all understand them a bit, but at A level I think it's taking it and thinking, what is the deliberate effect of doing that? You can think about things to do with time as well, the sort of manipulation of time. Chronology. Is the structure linear? In other words, are events described in the order in which they occur? Does the story have an open structure? Is the reader or the audience left to make sense of the ending? Is there a closed structure, which means there's a definite ending, although it could be open to interpretation? Is a structure circular or cyclical? So in Of Mice and Men, which so many of you will have studied, the characters end up in the same place or the same setting as that in which they began, in the brush. And broadly speaking, that symbolises that the itinerant workers are not able to change their lives. So those are the kind of things you want to think about with chronology. Are there flashbacks? Do events from an earlier time occur in the main sequence of events? Why are these flashbacks included? So many texts use flashbacks. I was just looking at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in chapter 5. Just as the creature is coming to life, there's suddenly this flashback. And writers know that flashbacks are used for a number of reasons, but one reason is to cause tension in the reader, because something really big is happening and then it goes to a flashback and the reader's thinking, I just want to know what's happening in the main plot. Or even worse, with something like Frankenstein, because it's a horror story, by going to the flashback, the reader's mind starts to imagine the worst case scenario of what's actually happening. So often the imagination is more frightening than reality, and flashbacks can often be used in that sort of way. We might also think about foreshadowing. Are there hints about future events? We see those often through symbolism, and I've just been looking at The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, and there's a lot of talk of shipwrecks, and that of course foreshadows what is going to take place. And we want to think about, do events take place over a day, a week, or even generations? You want to consider the narrative point of view and how it's manipulated. Is it written in the first, the second, or the third person? Is there a single narrator or multiple narrators? So many writers manipulate their use of narrative point of view. And I think for me, you can read a book and think, okay, I get this. This Pride and Prejudice is in the third person omniscient. Okay, simple. But then there are times, for example, in Pride and Prejudice, where although it's third person omniscient, it switches and it becomes third person limited. And we all of a sudden only know what Elizabeth thinks, and we are therefore shocked at the same time she is shocked, and that kind of thing. So I think the big thing with narrative point of view for A-level study is to be willing to reassess it constantly and to know that it can change. Even in GCSE level it does that, but that's not something that is often taught. Stories can flip between third person limited, third person omniscient, all those sorts of things. We want to think about repetition. Is there repetition of words, categories of words, motifs, which are of course dominant or recurring ideas, or repetition of themes? We can think of the rhythm of words in a sentence. Most people think only poetry contains rhythm, but prose and drama contain it as well. In the example, how I writhed and yawned and nodded and revived, we can imagine the narrator in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights restlessly turning in bed trying to get to sleep. So you mustn't limit things. That's another thing I think is key at A-level. You mustn't think, oh, that's a poetry analysis, this is prose analysis. We can bring it all to the table, and that'll help you with your studies. We can think about the juxtaposition of two ideas, places, characters or actions next to each other to create a contrast. If I'm trying to say that I'm tall, you can look at me and say, oh, yeah, fairly tall. But if I put myself next to a really short person, that juxtaposition, the placing of two opposites next to each other, highlights the fact that I am tall. And of course we can think about characterization. Is there a character who contrasts with the main character, a foil as we talk about, in a play or a story, or whose life parallels that of the main character? You can examine decisions to describe a character in an implicit, which is a way where they're suggested but not directly described, or an explicit, directly described fashion. And what effect does that create? How the writer decides to withhold important information about a character from the reader can also be very, very interesting. For example, again in Pride and Prejudice, Austen withholds important information about Mr. Wickham's past, and towards the end of the novel this information is revealed, and that helps us understand Darcy's attitude towards him. And moreover, because Mr. Wickham's past is a secret, the reader and characters in the book are lulled into a false sense of security, which makes Wickham's elopement with Lydia an unexpected shock, unless you've just heard about it in this video. Think about the use of plot and subplot as well. A subplot is a less important plot, also used as a foil to the main plot sometimes. I think in GCSE you often perhaps don't consider the subplots, but at A-level you now need to think about all the lines of story that are going on. So that's just an introduction to structure, some of the sort of terms that we might consider when we're looking at the structure of any text. And what I'm going to do in next week's video is look at what should we specifically look at in poetry, prose and drama when it comes to structural analysis. Please do give this video a thumbs up and pick up the ebook. It really does help and keep us working here at mrbruff.com.